Political Islamism's rise represents the antithesis to the neoliberal mixed-market democratic thesis Fukuyama thought would end history. Assess the validity of this statement. Neoliberalism is a political movement that began in the 1960s that blends traditional liberal concerns for social justice with an emphasis on economic growth. Political Islam, however, is the belief that the Islamic religion should guide social and political as well as personal life. To ascertain whether or not the beginning statement is true, we need to answer two fundamental questions about political Islamism, the first of which being, was it directly opposed to neoliberal mixed-market democracy to begin with? Is there a direct clash that enables it to be the antithesis? The second question is whether or not it is widespread or popular enough to qualify as a legitimate antithesis, i.e. the anarcho-punk music movement with their slogan "There's no authority but yourself" during 1984 wouldn't qualify as an anarchist antithesis to neoliberalism. One reason for the rise of political Islamism near the end of the Cold War was a dramatic increase in funding for these types of governments streaming in from the Saudi Arabian oil industry. More than 1,500 mosques were built with Saudi funds over a period of just 50 years. Along with the mosques, training for teachers and preachers was also paid for and provided for by public Saudi funds. Saudi Arabia also supported certain interpretations of Islam with their oil money in another way. They would reward academics and journalists who followed Saudi's strict interpretation of Islam. The strict interpretation of Islam that was advocated by the Saudis' money was the conservative Saudi-based Wahhabism or Salafism. It indicated that Muslims should not only always oppose Westerners in every way, but that democracy is responsible for all of the horrible wars of the 20th century. This seems pretty directly opposed and would probably answer our first question. Political Islamism in general's first major advocate was Abdul Allah Maududi. Maududi rejected the idea of Pakistan because it was led by secular, westernized politicians. He thought that Muslims should live by Islamist law that was free from all non-Islamic influences. This is another example of direct opposition to Western democracy and neoliberalism. This is Francis Fukuyama, and we went over some of his ideas in class, so this should hopefully just be a refresher. He argues that neoliberal mixed-market democracy somewhat triumphed over communism after the Cold War, and that this is the best thing since sliced bread. It satisfied both of what he saw were the only basic human motivations. One, the desire to be recognized as an individual human being. Liberal democracy gives everyone a vote and a voice in big governmental decisions and in who is running said government. 2. The desire for material things. Obviously, capitalism and neoliberalism with free market economics resulted in a higher supply and availability of these types of luxury consumer items than, say, the Soviet Union. They became extremely accessible, and anyone could have access to them. In conclusion, I do agree with the prompt that political Islamism's rise represents the antithesis to the neoliberal, mixed-market democratic thesis. The first reason being that the form of political Islamism that really took hold was Wahhabism and Salafism, the Saudi Arabian branches, both of which directly opposed Western democratic capitalism. Both thought that any inclusion of non-Islamic ideals was a bad and unforgivable thing. They both also blamed democracy for all major conflict in the 20th century. The second reason I agree is that the rise of political Islamism wasn't just a single isolated event in some small town in Saudi Arabia. Over 1,500 mosques were constructed during the late 20th century. This number somewhat attests to the size of increase in political Islamist states.